Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is a designer, thinker, and commenter on the world of games. A doctor of history, he wrote his dissertation about the discussion of the reality of the unicorn in Renaissance and early modern literature. As a designer, he's designed Mystery of the Abbey and Raptor, but he's probably best known for his devilish character selection game, Citadels. My guest this week is Bruno Faidutti. Bruno, welcome to the cabin.
Hi, happy to be here.
So I guess my first question is over the sort of email exchange we had, you were unable to find 5 games that you wished to take to the cabin with you in the event of the apocalypse. Why was this? Is it just that games themselves don't have a huge value to you, or is there something else?
Well, I don't know. I think the problem is that games are of big value to me. I think I have a few thousand games in my small Parisian flat, so I like to have games. And the problem was probably more in selecting the 5 ones to take. So that's why I opted for very versatile games, kind of games with which you can play lots of different stuff. And which means, standard card game and something like Cosmic Encounter, which is different every time you play it.
Oh, don't give it away. We need the audience needs suspense.
Okay, but otherwise, I'd like to take, a few thousand games, a few thousand books, and we will see. If it happens.
And so, I mean, how do you feel about sort of material possessions? Are you a collector? I mean, you said you've got a few thousand games, you've got a lot of books. Are you a collector? Are you someone who likes to hoard things, who likes to have things around them?
Absolutely not. I think I'm not a collector. Collecting things is kind of a fetish. It's owning instead of using, I think, in fact. I'm not really a collector because, I say I have a few thousand games, I have a few thousand books, but I don't have a list. I don't know exactly what is there. Sometimes I find out that I wanted to read again a book I already have and bought it again. So I view more my game collection, if you want the word, as kind of, just they are here around, and it's kind of documentation because, I like to, I think to design games, you have to know a lot about games, to look at lots of different games and see what's happening in them. When I don't have enough time or energy to read a novel, sometimes I just read game rules because I like it. I think it's something interesting to see how it's built and what's happening in it. But I don't think I'm a collector. No. It's problem giving games away when a friend of mine likes this or that game. Okay, I probably won't play it again. You can take it.
And so what do you think this phenomenon is? Because I look at where I'm recording now and I have sort of 3 shelves of games. It's sort of maybe a third of my collection. And I look at them and it sort of calms me in some way. And Borges, famously said, he couldn't go to sleep unless he's surrounded by books. What do you think the phenomenon of collection is for someone? Is it about security, a feeling of place?
Maybe, I like to have things around me. I don't sleep well when I am in, big empty rooms. I sleep well when everything is crowded and there are lots of stuff around me. But yeah, I think I really need to have, when I'm going to sleep, I need to have next to my bed a few games, a few books, and something with which I can launch my music. Yeah, just in case I happen to need something like this. I'm not someone who can meditate and think just by himself, I never understood what is meditation after all. And I need something to think on. I need something to work with. And most usually it's a game or a book.
I mean, is thought and focus for you a method of relaxation then?
I think yes.
So I want to go back to the beginning. So you were born in France, and you were born in France in 1961, and this was a time of turmoil for France. It was during the French-Algerian War, which ended a year later, and it seems that France has had a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Ambivalent relationship with its colonial history. When you were growing up, did you feel like you were living in a post-colonial France that was coming to terms with its history?
Yes, completely. Completely, because, actually my father fought in the Algerian War, and he went from a very, I think, relatively traditional family, and when he came back from Algeria, he was almost a hardcore leftist, so I think it changed him a lot.
What was the origin of that transformation, then?
I think what happened there and what he saw, and my parents stayed, had kept lots of relations with friends in Algeria, and my mother worked a lot as a geographer with universities there, and so my family was, this kind of intellectual left, half Marxist, and which were very, very concerned about all this colonial and post-colonial situations, and were always people from, mostly Algerian people, very often at home and coming here and discussing politics. And so, yes, I grew up in a post-colonial world, certainly.
And so you went to university, and you would have been too young to have engaged with 1968 and the riots that happened in Paris. Of course,
I was far too young. I just vaguely remember that I didn't really understand why we were not supposed to go to school.
But I mean, what effect did that have on the French university system? And did you feel the aftershocks of that time when you studied at university?
Not really. It was later. It was far later. It was almost 10 years later that I started studying at the university. And I first studied economics and law, which means in sector which had not, I think, been very much affected by the events of 68 and all that stuff. Law universities in France are very conservative. Economics universities almost didn't exist in 68 and appeared later for most of them. So, I was not studying, history or literature of this kind of stuff. I studied it later. I studied history later. And no, for me, I have really strong reminiscence of this, colonial issues when I was a kid, but as a young adult, not that much. I think it was also starting to, go away, and, 68, it was the past already.
And so what was the focus in sort of French economic universities? Was it sort of Hayekian? Was it Keynesian? Was it there that you met Marx?
Was where I was, it was more Keynesian, I think. But we had teachers from both sides.
And so, in your email to me, you called yourself a Marxist in the Zizek form of Marxism. Did you come to terms? Did you meet Marx at university, or you said your father became a hardcore leftist? Were you sort of born? Were you born into Marxism?
I think I was raised a Marxist, more or less. It was in my family. It was not, maybe I'm more a Marxist than my parents were, but I was raised in this, this was around, it was this kind of, half Marxist, half, this Christian left, which almost doesn't exist anymore today, and probably a good thing. And so I think I've been used to interpret things in this more or less Marxist terms, I think very young. So it's not something I really discovered later. It's not some kind of revolt. It's nothing like this.
And so do you believe that politics is essentially hereditary, that you follow the ethos of your parents?
Not necessarily. It's education. It's your life. I think life happens. And it's obvious that what happens when you are very young and your parents and your family is important. I think statistically, I've read statistics about this, something like a bit more than 2/3 people are globally on the same political side as their parents. So it means that it's something important, but your personal history can be also lots of other things happening. And some people react, some people go completely the other side. I think it's just what happened during your who you are and what happens and what makes your personal history. And for example, I think the fact that I took a strong interest in gaming, which was something my parents didn't understand and still don't understand. I think they almost don't play. It has an influence on my politics. The fact that I traveled a lot, the fact that almost all of my girlfriends were from strange parts and speaking strange languages. It's also had some effect on my politics. All this, it's just personal history which affects politics. And family is an important part of it, it's obvious. But
So I mean, if you read your bios on the internet, it talks a lot about you as a designer, but it also talks about, your favorite film, which is a Tarkovsky movie, and writers that have influenced you, that you enjoy. I mean, on this subject of sort of personal ideology, the way you look at the world, to what degree is that the people you're physically around, your experience, for instance, your exotic girlfriends, or to what degree is it the books that you read?
I think it's both. I think it's everything. I think books are important. I think books are very important to me. There are a few books which had a very strong influence on me. I'm thinking on Pynchon, Wallace, and that kind of writers. Or Joyce, or Céline, which is not exactly a leftist. But it's important. But the people I meet and the people I've met in the board game world, the board gaming world is very international. Lots of people from everywhere, and I'm trying to meet, I'd say it's most exotic and international parts. And it also has an influence of me because, I think reading a book makes you think, but meeting people, discussing with people makes you think as well. Playing games in a way also, I think not that much, but also maybe in a way makes one think about what's happening at least about why you play games. And lots of things can have an influence. I cannot say exactly why I am the guy I am now and thinking the way I am thinking now. But well, that's a fact.
And so, looking at this sort of now, you're going to have to bear with me because I'm nothing if not completely unknowledgeable about everything. But sort of shooting it through a sort of Marxist lens, when you look at gaming, do you see gaming as a primarily middle class pursuit? And do you think there's a lack of people from lower income backgrounds entering the hobby? And do you think that's an issue?
Actually, I don't think so. At least from what I know in France, it's true that our way of gaming, our board games are mostly middle class. That's true, but I think there are other games, traditional card games and everything, which are played by everyone, which are not in the end that different. So it's, and even I think it's becoming far more democratic this what I see in France, for example, with game cafes, which we have many, I know it's not that much. I discussed recently with a German friend who told me that there are not that much game cafes in Germany, but game cafes in France are bringing games to people who could not afford to, buy games all the time to play games. They just go here and drink a beer and play games, so it's true that I'd say the board gaming world has changed a lot in France, in Europe, and in the world. I'd say globally this 10 last years, and it's still changing. And for example, we have more and more women. I remember when I started designing games, it was in 1980s, where only men game designers, with one or two exceptions, and gamers were maybe 90% men. Now, I think gamers, it's still more men than women, but it's maybe 60-40, and we're starting to have more and more women game designers. It's the same with, people from very different backgrounds, and it's becoming very international. I'm working with Japanese designers, I'm working with Brazilian designers, I'm working with Korean designers, I'm working with designers from almost everywhere. I'm working with Iranians. And, what's the most striking in a way is that it's exactly the same. There is something specific about the board game culture, I think, now, is that because it's something relatively recent, because there is not that, we don't have hundreds of years of board game traditions and history, etc., etc. And the result is that all board game designers, be they French or German or American or Japanese or Iranians or who you want, have more or less the same background, have the same references, and the differences when they are very, very anecdotal. And I think it's something specific to board games, in a way. It's going everywhere now because, the internet, etc., etc. I think we have more and more kind of an homogenization of culture, which I think is not a bad thing. Everyone seems to think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing in the end. But for board games, it's really something where we all have more or less the same background. There's no real difference in board game design here and there. And it's becoming people from everywhere. And it's really fun. It's really international. It's really international. It's really, it's not really the word because the culture is created now in a way, but it's very open.
And so you went on from studying economics to studying history, and what stands out is the topic for your dissertation. And so can you tell us basically what your dissertation was about?
Okay. I think actually in history what I've always been a bit fascinated with is how do we realize we were thinking wrong? how do we realize that something was wrong? And my first master dissertation was about game. It was about history of chess, and not the history of chess by itself, but the history of chess, and how in the early modern times we read all the strange stories which had been told in the Middle Ages about the origins of chess were just bullshit. That it had not been invented by King Arthur, that it had not been invented during the Trojan Wars, etc., etc. How we realize this, and how this was replaced with another story about inventing, probably in India, maybe in China, which is still what we think now. And it's a bit of the same with unicorns. My question was, how did we realize that there were no unicorns? And it was interesting because in the Renaissance, there are a lot of relatively modern, rational scientists who take the medieval bestiary. And, in the medieval bestiary, there are, strange things, like a dragon, spitting fire and etc. and and Pegasus and kind of stuff. Okay, this doesn't make sense. It's bullshit. But there are also very, very strange things in these bestiaries, or relatively strange things, but which are not that fantastic, which could make sense. There are horses with, this one single horn, unicorn, but there are also elephants, with a nose 2 meters, 3 meters long, which is also very, very strange, and giraffes with this terrible neck. And so there are things which are thrown away. Okay, there are no dragons. There are probably no whales, because it was also described in 2 strange ways, and it came back later. But something like the unicorn, it was not more fantastic than elephants or giraffes or lions or crocodiles. And people so maybe. And for very, very, very long, it's this maybe, and how some people try to relate it to something else, or some, people come back from far away and say, I have seen unicorns, etc., etc. And so it's all this story of how we realize that what we were thinking was mostly wrong. And I think that's what I like. That's the fun of trying to track all this discussion between people who disagree on not very important points, because, the origins of chess or the existence of unicorn, it's not something politically or socially very important. But it's also interesting to take this kind of small issues to see how what everyone thinks, everyone believes, can be determined at some time, and how it evolves, and that's it. It's also because, I like to deal, with text in Latin and old pictures and all that stuff. It's also kind of an exotic, I think I talk about kind of fascination with exoticism. I think it's the same. It's this exoticism for the past and for somewhere else. It's a bit the same. And I think the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance is a period which I really like.
And so how does the unicorn then become the symbol of purity? Because if you look at its representation, it is this sort of virginal beast that somehow is an embodiment of good. When does this come in?
More or less. It comes relatively late, in fact. If you look in the medieval bestiary, you have this history about the unicorn, but you have similar stories about almost all animals, which kind of, Christian allegories that we have about the wolf, about the rabbit, about everyone. And which have been more or less forgotten. And the one about the unicorn has not. But the idea that the unicorn is really a symbol of purity and strength is something, I think, something relatively recent. It's almost a modern idea. It was in the old text, but it was buried with tons of other interpretations and similar stories about tons of other animals. And it becomes something very important, and that unicorn is just this. It's almost something from the 19th century. It was not that important before. It was here, but it was not that important. And it comes from, because, there are all these legends, the horn of the unicorn, which neutralizes poison, and you use a young virgin to lure the unicorn to catch her, etc., etc. So this has been used for this. But this kind of legends you can find in medieval bestiaries for almost all animals.
And so how do you feel about the modern representation of the unicorn? When I think about, when you were talking then, the picture that came into my mind was Legend, the 80s movie, which features a unicorn, and board games are using them a lot at the moment. I mean, how does that map on to previous conceptions of the unicorn?
Well, I think aesthetically it's the unicorn in Legend, and the unicorn we see everywhere now, which is pure white, looking very much like a horse. It's a unicorn which, it's still more or less a unicorn which graphically appears in the 15th century. And well, it has become, maybe there is a reason. Maybe there is a reason why it has become so important in this kind of geek and fantasy world now, is that it's not a mythological animal. It's not in any of our traditional mythologies. So we cannot say that it belongs to this or that or this people, because, it's not in the Norse mythology. It's not in the Greek mythology. It's nowhere. It just appears. From where it comes, it probably comes from someone who talked with someone who talked with someone who talked with someone who saw a rhinoceros. But it's not in any very really old tradition. And so, for this reason, maybe it belongs a bit to everyone. And it has become this kind of, and maybe it's just work. It looks nice. There is the horse. We like horses. So it's like a horse. It's white, so it's purity. There is a horn, so it's purity, but it's also strength. So it's not, you cannot say that it's too feminine, sexist, etc., etc. It's a bit of everything. So maybe it fits well. Actually, I like it. There are a few strange changes recent changes with the unicorns. Now there is kind of a mix between unicorn and Pegasus. We often see pictures of unicorn with wings, which is something very recent. I think it's maybe 20 or 30 years old, no more.
And the rainbow being associated with the unicorn, is that relatively recent?
It's also something recent, yeah. Yeah, it's also, but I think the use of the rainbow in general is something relatively recent. It was not something so often represented until maybe also 20, 30 years ago.
So your first game then isn't a game really, it's a game system, and it's often something that designers that I've spoken to choose. And this is a deck of cards. What do cards represent to the designer? Is it potential? Is it excitement? Is the deck of cards like the palette of paints to an artist?
I think yes. I think the deck of cards is just something so convenient for games, because you can shuffle cards, which means you can easily have randomization, which is more difficult with like the pieces you have in chess, you cannot shuffle your chess pieces. So of course you can decide that they have different abilities, different powers, different effects. But you have to start from something which is not random. So here you can shuffle the cards. They are all different, so you can decide that they have different effects. You can imagine different rules. It's something which is extremely versatile. And I think that's the only reason. If I choose a deck of cards, it's because with a deck of cards, I can play thousands of games and I can imagine thousands of other games. So it's, sometimes I feel that designing games like I do it, is making new components and pieces and cards for the game. Of course, it allows to do things which are different, which are more rich, which are more thematic. But sometimes I feel it's a bit a lazy way when we could probably make something as interesting with a simple deck of cards. I still think that poker is one of the very best games around.
And so how, when I think of probably my mother's generation now, but still people of my generation, especially when we were talking about class earlier, seems, the playing of cards and sitting around table playing card games seems to be a peculiarly sort of working class pursuit. What is that in America? And are there, I live in Germany now and I've lived in Austria, and there's Schnapsen and, particularly German card games. Are there traditional French classics that you don't see anywhere else?
Yes. We have a few trick-taking games like Belote, for example, which I think are not played anywhere else. We have a few, we even have very regional card games which are played only here or there. I think there are a lot of traditional card games in France, yes, like in most European countries, I think.
And so how responsible do you think is the humble packet of cards for the games that we have today and for the games that you and your colleagues design?
I think it's important because, when actually the second game I designed was a card game, not played with original, with traditional cards, but yes, I think the idea that we can do things with these pieces of paper and build a little world and have things go around, and I think it's responsible probably as much, probably also, chess and probably also gambling games and casinos and all that stuff. Everything is responsible. I think the actual board game craze is a bit a mixing of all this. But deck of cards are an important part of this ancestors. They are not the only ancestors. I think, all these games played on, checkered squares and, and checkers and chess and everything and, and fox and G's and all this are also important. And gambling games and just betting in the streets is important as well. But yes, I think cards are important.
So I want to talk now about your life as a designer. So when did games enter your life? Have you been playing games since you were a child?
No, I played, my family played very, very few. We almost didn't play games when I was a child. I think for my parents it was not something serious. We had to be political. We had to be serious, and playing games is a waste of time, like reading stupid novels when you can read serious essays. So I didn't play much as a kid. And I started really being interested in games, I think, when I was a late teen, when I was maybe 16, 17. So, and I played, I think I played everything. I played chess. I played poker a lot. I played role-playing games. I organized a few live-action role-playing games, and I've been interested in everything gaming, and I ended up being a game designer. And I think there are two main reasons, probably. One of the reasons is that I think I'm terribly lazy, and I'd like to write novels, but kind of big, ambitious novels, but I'm far too lazy for it. And designing games is kind of a lazy substitute for writing novels. It's like starting to write a novel with placing the main elements and how it works and how the relations will be built between the characters, etc., etc. And when you have to really start writing, you just stop and you give this to the players, and now it's your turn, and you tell the story. So I think it's something like this, that I like to be the idea of being creative, but real writing is, maybe I'm not good enough at it. Maybe I'm too lazy. I don't know. But anyway, I can do it. I was saying there's another reason. I think the moment when I really started to go into games, when I was something like 18 or 19, was the moment when I completely broke up with religion. And because I had been maybe not really a believer, but I asked myself a lot of questions about religion when I was a kid. And I think going into games was a way to, find something else which is far more rational, which is far more logical, but which has the same, which is politically, I think, far less ambiguous, but which has the same psychological use as religion. I think people who go into religion, it's usually because, we don't understand anything about this world. It's far too complex. It's a big mess. We don't know the rules. We don't know how it works. So we have to decide, okay, let's do as if it were so. And I think that's the real hurt of every religion. And if you break with this, suddenly the world becomes completely overwhelming. If you accept that you cannot understand why we are here, how it works, and that it's just a big mess, it's not something easy to deal with. And games are a very, very good way to deal with this, because with games, for a while, you enter the game, you enter the rules, and you say, okay, we are here, 3, 4, 5 people around the table, and for a few hours, we will do as if there were rules, as if there was a goal, etc., etc., etc. And so I think for me it makes sense that I went into game when I broke with religion, because I think religion is kind of a substitute for gaming, or gaming a substitute for religion. Religious people live in a game. They have rules, they have a goal, they know where they are going, they know what they are doing. Everything has a meaning. They have strategies, yes, they have their accountings. They are living in a game. And so if you don't have this, either you are very, very strong and you can accept to live in a world you don't understand, or you have to take a break from time to time. And this break, I think, for me, it's games. But it can be novels, it can be music, it can be other things as well.
I mean, do you think as the world becomes more secular and we lose this sense of, Christendom is no longer a thing, we lose this sense of community, do you think that the rise of hobbies, the rise of fandom, is it all a sort of desire to find a community for ourselves, a place in the world? And football, being a fan of Liverpool Football Club and an adherence to the Catholic faith is essentially a demonstration of the same thing.
Yeah, maybe also. I think there's a difference, because if you are a fan of the Liverpool Football Club, you don't think that is an explanation of everything in the world. But yes, there is this community aspect. But on the other hand, I'm not sure it's a bad thing that we are losing this feeling of community. I think it has made a lot of bad. I think the more we are in communities, the less we are just human with everyone. And so, yes, it's the same. It's necessary because it gives a rest, but it must not be too strong. I think actually there is a strong comeback of religions, and the result of this comeback is that people are again, going into their small community and thinking that they are right and the others are wrong. And I think it's dangerous. It's far less dangerous to be a fan of Star Wars, for sure.
So when did you realize that you had an aptitude for game design, that you could use it to essentially make money?
Well, it was more or less, I'd say it just happened. It might have been something else. I just happened to be, it was in the mid-80s, in Montpellier with a few friends who happened to be also interested in games. Was Pierre Créquin, who is dead now, and a few other ones. And we discovered, Dungeons and Dragons and all that stuff. I think we were among maybe the 3 or 4 first groups in France to discover this. So we just happened to be there when a few people with money decided that, okay, maybe we can really import this in France, and let's try to find someone who knows about it. And they landed on us. And so we started to design game inspired by what we knew. And what we knew was Dungeons and Dragons, Cosmic Encounter, and Civilization. And not that many things. But we started to do a few things, and we're here. I think we were here before the others. And that, I think I was just lucky to be here at the right time. If I were to design now the games I designed 30 years ago, maybe they would sell a few thousand copies. That would be it. But I was there at the right time. I was among the few people who had a really real culture of gaming, because I've always had this kind of curiosity. When I went into gaming, I immediately tried to, see what people are playing where, and even the rest of the world, etc. I was very curious of this from the beginning. So I was lucky to be here at the right time. And then that's it. I could certainly have become something else than a board game designer. I could have done politics. I could have done a lot of things, but, I'm into board games.
And so do you have a favorite design of yours? Or are all your children equal?
I always like the last games I've made. I have a few games I really like and which didn't sell that much, like Animal Suspect, which was never translated, which has been published only in French. Wakatanka, which I like a lot because it's so simple, so basic. But no, I think I like. Well, there are a few ones I don't like, but I won't give names. But most of my games I like. Yeah.
So your next game then is Codenames, and you mentioned then you like Wakatanka because it's simple. How revolutionary do you think Codenames is as a game design, and is that revolutionary nature the fact that it's so simple?
I don't think Codenames is that revolutionary. I think games like Codenames or Just One are just a modern version of Taboo. I used to play a lot of Taboo when I was 20, 30. Even with my board game designer friends, it was one of our classics. And then we forgot it. And then when arrived first Codenames, and then 2 years later Just One, we said, we again have the same kind of fun we had when we were 20 playing Taboo. So it's not revolutionary at all, but it's a great game. And I think if I added it to my list, it's also because, just like I said with Cosmic Encounter and with classic deck of cards, with the cards of Codenames, one can probably also invent a few other games.
And so do you see yourself in the apocalypse continuing to design games? Is this how you sort of express yourself creatively?
I don't know, I don't know how it will be after the apocalypse. I don't know how many we will be. I don't know anything. Maybe I'd just be interested in, playing solitaire or playing chess with one or two people here. Maybe we will keep on inventing stuff. Maybe we will be too busy surviving. I have no idea, but I don't know. Because, I think also one of the reasons, I like my kind of, I like being a small star, being kind of a star for a very, very small group of people. And I think, I like seeing my name on game boxes and all that stuff. And so if we were in a completely different system where this doesn't exist, I'm not sure I will still want to be creative. Maybe not.
So I want to go on then and talk about. I was reading this morning because I'd read your original essay a couple of years ago, and you recently, I don't know how recent it was, but wrote an expanded essay, and it was on the subject of colonialism and Orientalism in games. So firstly, what prompted you to write the essay on the subject?
Well, I think it was half a joke. It was just, I happened for various reasons. I had not read Edward Said before. So I read Edward Said, I think, something like 10 years ago for the first time.
So for those who don't know, Edward Said wrote a very famous book called Orientalism, which is a discussion of the West's depiction of the East, essentially, right?
I was really impressed when reading this and being into board games that it applied so well to the aesthetics of board games. And it wasn't, of course, it was not discussed in this book. It was discussed almost mostly literature. But I say, this should, it works so well with board games. So after having read this, I wanted to, I wrote about how to apply this into board game because I was impressed at how it worked well and much better than in many other domains. So I wrote this essay and I had fun because, it's always fun to look for pictures and kind of, see what are the aesthetic trends and the influences, etc., etc. And so writing this essay was relatively fun. And then I posted it on my blog, and I had, I think, maybe 1,000 times more visits and comments and emails than I ever had for anything I posted on my blog. And people are discussing and people giving me new ideas and people sending me, pictures of these games, that I didn't know. And so I added, and in the end it became a very, very long essay. But it was not something, in the beginning it was not something very serious about board games. It was just kind of, let's see if I can fit the aesthetic of board games into Said's analysis. And it worked well.
And we're recording this just after Essen in 2019, and one thing I noticed on social media during Essen and in the approach to Essen was a lot of criticism. There were lists of games saying, I can't believe it's 2019 and we're still whitewashing colonialism, and look at all of these games that deal with it but don't deal with it. What do you think that people have a problem with regards to the use of colonial ages, colonial traits in games?
It's difficult to be precise with this in English because, I could express my ideas about this in French quite easily. My English is not that good and I want to be precise. for me, it's not that much a problem that we are using, old cliches in games. I think it's not, games are not novels. Games are much simpler than novels. So games have to work with cliché because we cannot, when you write a novel, you can explain complex things starting with something simple and you go deeper and deeper and deeper in the text. The problem with the game is that the text is written by the players. So all you give is just the basic starting background. And so this basic starting background, it works only if it is already well known by all players and they can plunge in it. And that's why it has to be cliché. But I think what is important is to recognize that it's cliché, to assume the cliché, to say, okay, I'm not designing a game about this reality. I'm designing a game about this cliché. And that's what I try to do now as much as possible. I don't believe, in the idea that we can make games with a strong political meaning, for example, because games cannot have such a complex structure as novels or even as music. Games have a very simple structure and everything complex happens during the playing. It doesn't come from the designer. So games cannot be really political. Games have to be based on cliché if they have a setting or something very simple. But it's important to say it, to be, something ironic somewhere, to make people understand that you are not taking this too seriously. And I'd say I'm as worried by the excessive, maybe, Orientalism of some games than I am worried also by those who, when I hear now that games should have, such social value, etc., etc. I think it's not the role of games. Games are here for us to escape reality. And, I can kill in a game. I can do lots of stuff. I can play werewolf. Werewolf is just, game about looking for the black sheep. It's not something very nice. It's not a reason not to play werewolf because playing werewolf is just fun. So games are, and usually when games try to be serious, when games try to take their setting and their terms seriously, they end up being boring.
And yet, in your essay, you refer to two games that I think do a great job in raising questions about colonialism and the role that it's had. So you reference Archipelago and you reference Spirit Island, and they seem to me, although I think it's incredibly interesting that you mentioned that the use of the spirits is Orientalism in and of itself, but they subvert the notion. They bring the natives into the colonial story, I think, in quite a powerful way. And also, I mean, when I look at a game like The Grizzled, it seems to me to be something that is dealing with a deep question about who we are as humanity in a very mature but very gamified way, right?
Yes, but I think for The Grizzled, I completely agree with you. I think in a way it's an exception. I don't think there can be that many games working that way. For Spirit Island and Archipelago, actually they are I see the point of these games. They are absolutely not the kind of games I want to design because they are far too complex. I don't play games that are that complex. So maybe it's possible to be more involved. Maybe it's possible to be more precise, more specific, more involved when you design that kind of complex games. But when you design light, fun games to be played in 15 or 20 minutes, which is what I'm trying to design, you cannot go into this. And it won't necessarily be fun to everyone. But you're right. I say it. And there are games which are more subtle with this Oriental settings than other. But I think it's not a reason. I think for me, what is important, I think the point with my essay was not to say we should not do it. The point of my essay was to say we should know what we are doing and explain it and explain why we are doing it.
I mean, I think it's interesting that, you know, it's been called, and Said has been very influential, and people call it Orientalism, and yet, for me, when you look at the sort of Orientalism that you cite in your essay, and you sort of look at it in popular culture, it sort of eschews the present. It's always looking at the past. And do you think there's mileage in saying that possibly we just have a desire to fetishize the past? Because if you look at, you know, a lot of Kurosawa's movies, I'm sure that their connection to the real samurai era is as much of a fetishization as with,
you know, actually, I think most Kurosawa's movies have far stronger relation with Shakespeare plays than they have with samurais.
Or indeed Western movies, if you look at Yojimbo, right?
Yeah, but I think you know, I was thinking about cliché. When you talk about fetishizing, it's the same idea. It's the same thing. I think, yes, we probably need such simple references that we can use, so that we can tell simple children's stories, or so that we can play such simple games. And these references have to be shared by everyone, so they have to be very simple. They have to be very basic. And if possible, to be a bit fun. And yes, I think history and exoticism are good places for this, but now it's also starting to be the same with, you know, all this modern geek cultures with TV series, science fiction, etc., which I don't know that as well, but which works also in the same way. It also gives us such small, simple universe that we can use in games. I think today, you know, making a game in Star Wars universe or making a game in the Renaissance, it's exactly the same. You are working with the same kind of cliché. And making a game, an exotic game, and you know, it's the same.
And where do you stand on the notion of cultural appropriation? Do you think that we should leave the representations of cultures to the people who inhabit those cultures? Or is culture far too slippery a thing to be able to put those limits on?
I think it's extremely slippery. I think the problem with cultural appropriation is less that we are doing too much appropriation, even when it's that the others are not doing as much as we are. You know, the Japanese, for example, they have the same kind of exotic assumed cliches about the West that we have about the East, but it's kind of an exception. It's true that so far cultural appropriation goes mostly the same way. We are the one appropriating the rest of the world, and I think it would be fun if it went also the other way. But I don't, you know, my problem now is that I think there is very, very, very roughly, we went from the good old racism of which few generations ago, maybe 1 or 2 generations ago, we say, okay, racism was thinking that we are superior. Now it's, okay, no, we are not superior, we are different. I say it's a first step, but the second step should be, in fact, we are not that different. And that's why now I'm very worried by kind of, well, it sounds like something leftist and progressive to say we must accept differences. And very often people who say we must accept differences, what they think is we should emphasize differences. And I think we should not emphasize differences. We should say that in the end, we're more or less the same. And, you know, and that I think cultural differences are really overstated, overdone, are not that strong in the end. You know, there are French people who have thought process which I absolutely don't understand, and Chinese or Japanese or Arab people who obviously think exactly like me, and thinking that people will think differently because they have different histories, they speak a different language, they listen to different music, and they eat different food. For me, it makes no sense. And history is just a history of mixing everything, and we should continue mixing everything. So, but the problem is that we must be careful that this mix is balanced. It's not everything, it's not the important things coming from one and just food and some rhythmic music coming from somewhere else. We must try to take the best of everything. And that's a problem. But in a way, I'm for cultural appropriation. I'm in favor of cultural appropriation because I'm in favor of mixing everything into a big, colorful mess. I think that's what we should do now with all the cultures of the world.
So I want to talk now about the future for you. What do you have coming up in the future game-wise? And is there anything is there some great gaming ambition that you have?
Well, I'm becoming old. I'm almost 60, so I don't think I'm as original as I was when I was 20 or 30. So I don't think I will make everything groundbreaking, but I have a very, very fun party game which I've designed with Yohan Go, a young Korean designer, and which is kind of fun, really party game about designing people's life. You are just trying to invent the life of people and deciding who they are living with and in what house and which pets they have, etc., etc. But it makes for a really, really fun party game. So I hope it will be successful. And what else? I'm looking here. I have tons of games. I'm going a bit into children games. I have a children game designed with Anja Wrede, a German designer I like a lot. And we've designed a few games together, which have not been that successful, but I hope this one will. And, well, I have lots of games. I'm working with a Japanese publisher on a Japanese adaptation of Castle with, Japanese characters, etc., which is fun. Also because, trying to see what they are doing differently than what we would be doing if making it Japanese, especially with the name, it's really fun. Yes, I'm really trying to, I say the important thing for me, I think I'm already getting enough money from games. I don't need much more. So I'm also trying to have fun, and I'm trying to have fun with really working with people from all around the world. And I think that will probably be the most important in the coming years.
So your final game then is, you've mentioned it a couple of times, and it's a classic, and this is Cosmic Encounter. What is it about this game that captures so many people's attention?
I think Cosmic Encounter is a game for game designers. Because it's a game which starts from the idea that things can always change. It's a game which is like, it's almost like a toy for game designers. You can play with it, invent new abilities, design new stuff, new cards, new moons. And I say almost everyone who plays Cosmic Encounter becomes a game designer, because you start thinking how to add this and this and this and this and this and this to the game, and then you end up designing something else. So it's a game which is completely open, with very simple basic elements, but going in so many directions, and the possibilities to add. It's a game which is it's not a closed system. I think it's the first game for which, in the first edition, you could buy blank cards to add what you wanted to it. And for me, that's the spirit. It's the spirit of this game. And with the friends with whom I played it a lot in the 80s, we used to invent a lot of new alien powers, a lot of new cards, a lot of new moons, new rules, etc., etc. And all the people who play Cosmic Encounter a lot invent their new stuff, and they all end up playing a different game. And I think that's what I like about it.
And so do you think that there's something in the game, one great innovation that was brought in that has assured the game sort of life? Because it's 40 years old now and it still seems to be as vibrant today as it was when it came out.
I think it's this openness, which is a bit paradoxical because, what I talked about religion, in a way, I think what makes a game is that it's a closed system. But Cosmic Encounter is at the same time a closed system because when you are playing a game, you are just playing this game, and a completely open system because you can add what you want before the game starts. And I think this was something completely new. And we have found this again a bit, there is this idea with of these collectible card games and maybe a bit deck building games where you are adding things, trying to make your things, but it's not so open, it's not so fun as it is in Cosmic Encounter.
So you're the apocalypse is coming. You're driving out of Paris to the cabin, and you go around a corner, and the back door of the car flies open. Two of the games you've chosen fly out down a ravine into a river and are swept away for all eternity. Which game do you hope is sitting on the back seat of the car?
I think the deck of cards.
Excellent. So if people want to get hold of you, or they want to see what you're writing on your blog or what games you're bringing out, how can they do that?
They just visit my blog, Faidutti.com, and then there they will have my email and everything, and they can contact me and ask me. I'm also on Facebook, a little bit on Twitter, and I'm too old for the other stuff.
Brilliant. Well, Bruno Faidutti, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can support the show in many ways. You can tell your friends. You can talk about it on social media. You can talk about it on your own blog, podcast, or video. Or you can support it directly by going to patreon.com/5G4D for a rolling donation, or for a one-off donation, hitting the PayPal link at the bottom of the website, 5gamesfordoomsday.com. It's these donations that keep the show going. Also, if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on Twitter at 5gamesfordoomsday, or send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. And if I've managed to sashay away from the sentient irony and the little teapots, short and stout, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.